Patreon.com/the Walk Off Podcast. $4 a month gets you in there.
Jeff, I got a question for you here that Adam and I, just for whatever reason, man, seem to get asked all the time by our listeners. And so I know you're a little more qualified to answer this. Ricky Tiedemann.
Yeah.
What needs to happen for him to start games with the Toronto Blue Jays this year? Because, and I don't know if it's I'm a glass half empty kind of guy, because when I hear that, my knee-jerk reaction is, oh no, the worst has happened, right? Like injuries have piled up.
My first sort of smart ass response was going to be somebody was going to go down with an elbow injury. But, you know, I've had this guy described to me by two people in the organization who've been there as another Alek Manoah. And if I had told you that Alek Manoah would do what Alek Manoah was doing, right? If we'd had this discussion a couple of years ago and you'd have said, okay, what's it going to take? What would have to happen for Alek Manoah to be a regular part of the rotation? I'd probably come up with a smart ass answer and say, well, somebody would have to get hurt for that to happen. He did, exactly. He's on the fast track. You know, I've talked to people in the organization. I said, best case scenario, this guy comes out in spring training and is lights out, and he just blows the doors off you. And all I've been told is, well, if that's the case, then he starts at a higher level at the minors. Because of the Chris Bassett acquisition, I don't think there's an opening for him right now, but I would not at all be surprised if he isn't, for one reason or another, if he isn't part of the rotation in the summer. It wouldn't surprise me. I think he may be that guy who just knocks at the door so much that, especially for a team that needs to and wants to, go to the World Series this year, they may just be obligated to use him. A couple of things factor into this. One, what is Jose Barrios going to do this year? If he goes back to being the guy he was a couple of years ago, that's good news. I also don't know what the Jays make of Nate Pearson yet. I think you're going to see Nate. I think that they want Nate Pearson. If he isn't traded, they want Nate Pearson to break camp with the team. I think they'd love to see him in the bullpen as a guy who can give them a little bit of depth, maybe with an eye towards eventually seeing him as a late inning alternative. I think the ship has sailed on him as a starter, but I think those two arms will have a say on what happens with Ricky Tiedemann. And then, of course, there's Yusei Kikuchi as well. So I guess that's kind of a long answer of saying an impressive spring training increases the likelihood that he is with the Blue Jays at some point during the year. I don't know if there's a way he could make the team out of spring training.
It's such a roll of the dice with these young guys, right? Like you look at Ricky's numbers and they're incredible. But then you look at his age, 20 years old. There's only 74 innings pitched as a pro ball player, which again is just such a small sample size. And I know that when Manoah was on the verge of being called up, both Adam and I were screaming from the rooftops, don't do it. Don't ruin this young man's development. And then, of course, we've eaten our words ever since. And so I'm a little bit more willing to let Ricky get that call up, but he is 3 years younger than Manoah was. So it's just such a, I don't know, when it comes to development, I'm just glad I'm not the one making the decisions.
Yeah. And there's something else at work here with Ricky Tiedemann's as well. He is going to be the first possibly elite starting pitcher they have produced out of their pitching factory. We've heard about how much money they've spent on the pitching lab in Dunedin, and they certainly have. I think, and Ricky spent a lot of time there last year, and Ricky has spent a lot of time there. So I think that's, to your point, I don't know if we really know how advanced this guy is. I mean, I think we're getting to the point in baseball where it's it's not even going to make sense to look at how many innings a guy has in the minors before he's called up. I think you're going to see so much work in pitching labs that the teams they'll have their ways, they'll have their analytical ways, they'll have their biomechanical ways of determining whether or not a guy is ready to pitch in the majors. So, the point you make is really good. I think Ricky Tiedemann is a harder guy to get a read on than any other prospect they've had, largely for that reason, because so much of the work he is doing is being done, maybe not behind closed doors, but, in this lab. I don't think we really know where he is, at what stage of his career he's in.
That's such a great point. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about this pitching lab? Like,
it's where baseball's going. I mean, it's one of the reasons that you're starting to see so many minor league teams go by the wayside. And it's one of the reasons you've seen Major League Baseball essentially assume control of the minor leagues, because at some point, baseball people got together and said, why are we footing the bill for all these teams in all these different cities when we've got the technology, we got the know-how, we've got the money, we have the resources to sort of bring it all in-house and to keep a closer watch on these guys, right? And it's, when you have a guy in a minor league, at a minor league team, yes, you do have a club, the club trainer there, he's a team employee and all this stuff, and the manager's a team employee, and there's game reports and all of this. But the idea of bringing a lot of the development in-house and, utilizing AI and stuff like that, all these things that are now being used by teams with lousy payrolls, teams with elite payrolls, there's a much more, I don't even know, I wouldn't use hothouse, I think is the wrong terminology. It's much harder, I think, it's a much more secretive process, I guess, determining when a person is ready to go to the major leagues. And a lot of the data, a lot of the signals that teams look for aren't things we see. It's nothing to do with the, AAA batting average. Obviously, if a guy is playing at AAA and he's hitting 700 halfway through the year, but I think, as someone pointed out to me last year, what you see when you look at the numbers in AA and AAA and single A probably isn't what the organization is necessarily seeing in the player. They're looking at how he's growing. They're looking at his maturity level. They're looking at bat speed. They're looking at arm length. They're looking at all that stuff that we can't see. And that's, that's more going to be more and more a thing. I think you are going to see guys, you'll see prospects eventually who'll spend more time in their first year at a quote unquote pitching lab or a hitting lab than actually competing. I think there are going to be some guys that teams are just going to bring in-house and they're going to make them projects. And I think maybe Ricky Tiedemann, kind of the first guy out of that group for the Blue Jays. I'll tell you what, it's going to make the folks who have to do prospect rankings in the next 5 years, God love them, because it's going to be a lot harder to do.
So this is such an interesting point with the pitching lab and the in-house development, because there's always been this idealism within baseball of don't waste your bullets in the minor leagues. But now you're actually starting to see that kind of come to fruition, because they're able to, tighten up that microscope and kind of focus in. Yeah.
So, and if you can work on something and it can be a controlled competitive environment, right? Let's say you're Ricky Tiedemann, you're working on a pitch. Well, if you're the Blue Jays, take 11 guys, go over to the Phillies complex, have Ricky Tiedemann's pitch 3 innings in a game in a controlled environment, and let him work on what he needs to work on, get the video, go back to the lab, as opposed to sending him to AA. And you have some control over him. and it's certainly good to see how guys compete. It's great to see guys throw in a real game situation to other players. And I'm not saying you'll ever see that, but I do think you are going to see a time where a minor league player does a little bit with his team, comes back to the pitching or hitting lab, goes to another team, comes back to the pitching or hitting lab. And I think it's a way of controlling the environment. And I think perhaps also a way of, if not necessarily limiting injuries, adjusting more quickly to red flags. And it's something that, as I said, as long as I've been covering baseball, I used to wonder about that. Why does baseball? I mean, baseball spends so much money on the minor leagues. It's the one sport where, college basketball, the players are developed by the college football. The NBA players are developed by college basketball. NFL players are developed by college basketball. NHL players are developed by college hockey or junior hockey. Baseball, well, you draft them and then you pay a lot of money to develop them. And it only makes sense that at some point teams would look at this and go, okay, how can we kind of do this a little more efficiently? And that's what we're seeing.
So with these pitch labs, hitting labs, essentially this is a high-tech batting cage, right? You've got all the cameras, the Rapsodo machines. You're just taking every analytic, but that's essentially what it is, right? Controlled environment. This is a indoor opportunity to just throw a simulated game or whatever the case may be, and then pull every piece of data from every single pitch.
Yeah, and I know there are teams like the Tampa Bay Rays that do a lot of those visualization drills with their players. It's as I said, it's really become it's really made it difficult to get an accurate gauge on where a young player or a young pitcher is for those of us on the outside.
And this is so new, cutting edge for the Jays organization. Even Alek Manoah missed out on it, is what you're saying.
Well, I mean, the pitching
maybe missed out on it is the wrong way to put it, but this is
less focused on. Yes.
Yeah, well, this was all part of the redevelopment of the minor league complex, right? They sunk a lot of money into that, and the whole spring training site has been altered, and that was very much. And again, that gets to, it's another thing that, an organization that didn't have a lot of home crowds for a couple of years felt confident enough in the vision of Mark Shapiro that they sunk a bunch of money into technology, right? And every team is doing it. I shouldn't say every team. I don't know, for example, a team like Oakland, I don't know necessarily what they're doing, but teams are starting to really focus on that. And it makes a certain amount of sense. I don't know what it means for the minor leagues. Frankly, I don't think it can mean anything good for the minor leagues. And that's another story. But in terms of efficiency, you look at a AAA roster, how many guys on the Buffalo Bisons are probably realistically going to play for the Jays, right? And you ask yourself, okay, why do the Jays need to worry about that? Why do they need to worry about guys who are never going to be in their team, right? Why not focus on the 20 or 30 or however many prospects you have that have a legitimate shot of at some point being in the majors? And as I said, I think baseball teams have come to that conclusion that they have to be more efficient when it comes to this.
It is going to be so interesting, Jeff, when they get to the point, like we just brought up the 74 innings by Ricky Tiedemann, right? And it's going to be so interesting to see innings almost go out the window when it comes to development. It's not going to matter, right? Like the way you're explaining it and the way that they're going to be focused in on these labs and isolating strengths and stuff like that and bolstering players, one-on-one. It's crazy to me that 74 innings in pro ball, it doesn't really matter. You could still see him get the call up this year.
Yeah, I think they're going to be, and this again will put pressure on the teams that it's going to have to go on a case by case basis, right? Because there are players that you probably will want to see. You may want to see a full year out of somebody at AAA or at AA. But I think with pitchers, it's building up arm strength, all of that stuff. Can you build up? Why can't you build up arm strength in a pitching lab? Why can't you get a guy to throw 70 pitches or 80 pitches every 3 days in a pitching lab? Right? I mean, that's what I
can. Yeah.
That's where I think you're going to see the real impact. I think for position players, there's probably still going to be something to be said for, playing every day, right? You're the dude out of college and now you got to play every day. And we think you might be able to be our starting shortstop at some time. So I think in that case, you may see a guy, the thing will still hold true. But I think pitching is it's the next 5 years is going to be like the Wild West. We're going to see stuff with pitchers. We're just going to shake our head and go, didn't see that coming.